We're now on Daf Kuf Yud Beis Amud Beis, and we said that by adding 2 lumps of salt into the beidugi, it causes the dam to float down to the bottom and the fat from the meat to float on the top. The Gemara says umashve. Now, all you have to do is pour off the fat from the top because it floated to the top. And you have to be very careful not to mix or stir the fat together with the red colored blood. And then you could eat the fat, use it for gravy. So this is what Rav Ashi allows if you want to use a beidugi. Now, it's not clear exactly when you put these 2 lumps of salt into the beidugi. It would seem from the Rif and the Rambam and the Magid Mishnah that the 2 lumps of salt in the beidugi should be placed there before he actually puts it in its place. Right? Where is the beidugi going to be located? It's going to be underneath this roasting piece of meat. First, before you put the beidugi underneath the meat, put the salt in so that the dam will be, in a sense, pulled or absorbed by the salt, these 2 lumps of salt, down to the bottom of the beidugi. Then you put the roasted meat on top of the beidugi, and now any dam will settle to the bottom immediately because the salt is there. And then subsequently, what's going to happen is that the fats, when they fall down into the beidugi, will float to the top of the surface. Amalei Rav Acha Breder of Ikol of Ashi. Rav Achel turns to Rav Ashi and he questions the very premise of Rav Ashi. He understood, Rav Ashi, that Shmuel was being lenient about the beidugi. And why so? Because Shmuel pointed out that the real dark red liquid was already drained from the meat. And now you want to catch the dripping fat, you put the beidugi in. Umi Omer Shmuel Hachi. Your very premise, Rav Ashi, that Shmuel allows you to use a beidugi as long as the dark red liquid has already drained out of the roasted piece of meat. Ha'amar Shmuel, we have another statement of Shmuel, Kikar shechatach aleh basar asur liochlo. I don't get it. We opened up this whole discussion with a statement of Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel that if you put down a loaf of bread, on top of it you slice meat that was roasted, you cannot eat the loaf of bread. Shmuel fed it to his dog. So you see clearly that Shmuel is not impressed with the fact that once the red liquid, is completely drained from the meat, that therefore you could put this beidugi under the meat because the blood is taken out. That's not so. If Shmuel held that the blood was already drained out of the meat, why did he insist that if you cut a piece of meat on top of a loaf of bread, you got to get rid of the loaf of bread? Apparently, there's still dam there, and it's real McCoy dam that is coming out of the piece of meat by virtue of the fact that you sliced it. You remember that we discussed yesterday the combination of two very, very powerful operative rules in Taroves. One is davar charif, like when you cut a radish or an onion, or let's say, how do you say shum in English?
Garlic. Garlic.
What's it called?
Garlic.
Say it one more time.
Garlic.
Garlic. Yeah, garlic. Or lemon. So that's called davar charif. And by slicing it, we have another rule that governs the laws of Taroves, and that's called duchka de sakina, the dochak, meaning the pressure of the knife. So that's a volatile combination. Like, for example, if you would cut an onion with a milchika knife, then you can't use that onion for fleischiks. Or if you cut it with a fleishika knife, you can't use it for milchiks. And the reason is because of duchka de sakina, which means the pressure of the knife. That pressure of the knife causes a blia to come out and be polate. And therefore, in the case where he cut a piece of meat with red liquid with a knife, the knife causes the redness, which is blood, to be polate because of duchka de sakina. And that's where Shmuel said, I have to throw out this piece of bread because a very significant volume of red blood comes out of the meat when you slice it. He says Shmuel holds that roasted meat does contain a residue of dam, and that's why he threw out the piece of bread. So there's dam left in the meat because roasting doesn't draw out all the dam. And why does he allow you to place a beidugi after the smoke arises, as we discussed before? And the answer is that the juice that drips from the meat is only like fatty juice. It's not really dam. But when he cuts the meat with a knife, and the pressure exerted by the knife forces dam that remains within the meat to fall onto the loaf, and then it's absorbed in the loaf, and therefore Shmuel was machmer and he threw out the loaf. That's called duchka bisakin. Omer of Nachman. Okay, now we get into the sugya of moliach hareu kirosef that we discussed. And what he did was he salted both fish and chicken in the same pot. Now, keep in mind, there's no din of malicha to salt fish. You're allowed to eat the fish. There's no dam in fish. But he salted the fish in order to give it a good taste. But simultaneously, in the same bowl, he salted meat, chicken. Now he wants to eat the fish, but once he salts the fleischiks, right, the chicken, then we have halacha of moliach hareu kiroseach, which means that any dam that comes out as a result of the salting of the meat, of the chicken in this case, now is being cooked or heated together with the fish. So the fish is now going to absorb the blood that results from the malicha. Now, it seems from Rav Nachman that both the fish and the chicken are also, because it says asurim. And Rashi says this cannot be. Impossible. Because remember that other principle that we had over and over again in Tarovas, that agav de polit lo boli, since the chicken is being salted and its dam is being removed, and it's now being polate, lo bali. It doesn't absorb the blood back into the fowl, into the chicken. Therefore, we have to assume that whatever pieces of fish became asur, they were bolea the dam, and that's why Rav Nachman uses the plural asurim, but the fowl itself, the chicken itself, is mutter. Hechi dam. Now, there are two ways of salting. One is with a kli menukav, and one is with a kli she'ena menukav. Menukav means perforation. It has holes in it. And when you salt something that has holes in it, then we assume that the liquids that come out of the salting immediately go through the holes. So the Gemara says, Hechi dami, iba kli she'ena menukav. One second, I'm going to skip a little bit and we'll come back. Iba kli menukav, afilu dogim v'ofes namisha. Why are we worried about the fish absorbing the blood from the salted fleishiks when it's menukav? If it's menukav, then we assume that the dam that comes out of the malicha goes immediately through the holes. And if, on the other hand, I'm going backwards now, it's a kli she'ena menukav, right? There are no holes on the bottom of this vessel that he's using for the salting. Then afilu ofos v'ofos nami asiri. Why are you telling me a story about ofos v'dogim? What happens if you have two pieces of chicken in an unperforated solid bowl and you salt them both? What's going to happen is that the other piece of meat in that bowl is going to absorb the dam. So the Gemara answers, just one second. Yeah, I thought of this on my own, but okay, he says it here in the name of Rashi. If the vessel in which you're doing the salting is unperforated, then what happens is the dam that comes out sort of sits there, right? There's nowhere to go. And the meat is now soaking in the dam, so that even after it's polate and after the dam came out and it was exuded from the meat, it's still sitting there, swimming in the meat, so to speak, and therefore it will reabsorb the meat. And therefore the Gemara says that afilu ofos v'ofos also. Li'olam v'kli menukov. Okay, good. He did the salting the way he was supposed to do it, with a perforated vessel. And therefore this question is, we have no reason why we prohibit the fish, because the dam coming out of the meat is going through the holes. V'dagim, you'll ask me why the dagim asur. Mishum de rafu karmaihu. Okay, so here's another rule of the physics of the Gemara, and that is that the speed, I'm looking for a different word, but anyway, the speed at which a uh, a foodstuff will exude, that means being polate, varies. And it depends upon the texture of the skin. In this case, we're talking about fish and meat. And there's something called rafu kamayim. That's one category of a piece of food, that the fish has a skin that's soft. As a result of that softness, whatever it has to be polate, it does so at a rapid pace. There's nothing holding back the juices from the fish, or call it the blood from the fish, you want to call it. Well, it's not dam al pidin, but from coming out. And therefore, what's going to happen is that if you compare the speed of plita, of the meat on the one hand, and the fish on the other hand, since the meat is going to be polate as a relatively slow rate, whereas the fish is polate because of its soft skin at a very quick rate, then at the point that the fish is finished being polate, and now it's free to be bolea, the meat is still being polate. And therefore, that extra plata of dam is now being absorbed by the fish. But ophos, on the other hand, why is the rate, R-A-T-E, why is the rate of oozing out, of emitting its blood slowed down? What slows it down? Kmite. Kmite is the exact opposite of kromayu, whereas kromayu means soft and porous. Kmite means a tight skin. So the meat, which has dam in it, is surrounded by tight skin. And the plata process, when it's going through salting, because moliach harei krosech, is slowed down. And therefore, what happens if we take a look chronologically? Basar denaichi dogim, the dogim have already completed their process of plata, right, of all their, their bloods and juices flowing out or emitting, is naichi dogim. The dogim are now at rest, so to speak. If they're at rest, now they could be bolea. Is plete, right? Dogim is naichimi plete, so they've completed their process of emitting their juices. But ophos, the ophos that have this hard skin, are still in the process of being polate. And now the fish, since it's now in a resting situation, it's not torud, now it's going to absorb the dam from the meat. The bottom line is, it's not a good idea to salt fish and meat in the same, even perforated, vessel. Rav Mari bar Rachel, I always wondered why they called him by his mother's name. Maybe his father died when he was just a baby and she raised him alone. I don't know. Anyway, imlech le basa shchuta bahari basa treif. This was not a good idea. I don't know why he did it, but he did the salting of a treifa piece of meat together with a geschachten piece of meat, a kosher piece of meat. But to make some sense out of Rav Mori, we're going to have to assume that this was a kli menukov, and it was perforated, and the blood of the treifa meat immediately went down into the holes and was not absorbed by the kosher piece of meat. And we have to assume, which is a very logical assumption, that the two pieces of meat had the same exact rate of plata. Because it wasn't meat and fish, but rather meat and meat. Also, Lakami to Rava. Rava was the posek. Now, it's not 100% clear who actually decided to bring this, this scenario, whatever you want to call it, or let's call it the kosher piece of meat that was slaughtered, to Rava's attention. I mean, it seems that Rav Mari did it lechatchila. He didn't have any problems with it. So maybe somebody else brought it to Rava's attention because that person was very surprised at what Rav Mari did. And Rava called in Rav Mari to give him all, to give it to him over the head, so to speak. Amaleh. So Rava, without even responding and ruling on the question, he simply quotes a brisa. And he knows that Rav Mari is going to understand the brisa and draw the correct conclusion that what he did was not a very good idea. Meaning he thought, Rav Mari, that the kosher meat was certainly not absorbing the blood of the treifa meat because, as we said, it's a perforated kli. So now we get into another issue, which is called sear. Do you remember I mentioned that word a little earlier today? Sear is juice. Like, I don't know if you ever had this experience where you cut a piece of steak, either at home or in a restaurant, and did you notice some red juice? Did it ever bother you? I don't know. It always used to bother me. I said, well, isn't that down? Did they not do a good job in Malicha? So that's called sear. And that sear has to be defined halachically. Is it dam or is it not dam? So what happens is you salt the meat, the dam comes out, but there's still some red liquid that still oozes out from the meat, even after the salting, and that's called sear, literally juice. And Rava is going to quote a brisa, and he's going to make a tzushtel, like an analogy from this brisa, that sear is awesome. What's the subject of the brisa? The brisa is not talking about salting meat and the red juice that comes out after the blood comes out. No, the subject of this brisa is shrutzim, which I guess literally you call it creeping creatures, which are asur. And apparently these shrutzim have tzir. And the brisa darshans the extra hay in a word that appears in the parsha in Vayikra Yud Aleph of shrutzim. And the brisa wants to know why the hay is added to the word hatmeim. Tmeim means they're forbidden. Now, just on the side, I don't think it's so relevant, but I'll just mention it. A sheretz has two halachas. Number one, you're not allowed to eat it. And number two, it's metame. So if you come in contact with a live creeping creature, you become tame, become a rishon l'tum. After the sheretz is dead already, then as a general rule, it's not metame anymore. But there are 8 shrotzim, which are delineated in Vayikra Perek Yud Aleph, Shmona shrotzim, and they are metame even benivlasam, even after they're dead. In any event, hatmeim, says the brisa, lesser, it's coming to add to the regular iser of consuming a sheretz, tziron, rotvan, v'kipa shalahem. I mean, we're going to focus our attention on the word tziron, but for completion sense, Rotev is some sort of a gravy, which probably means that if you cook the flesh of these creeping creatures, or you roast them, then the fire somehow brings out a gravy. I don't know exactly what it looks like. And then we have sediments. So you have sediments are those small pieces of meat. In any event, Rava is assuming an analogy between shrotzim and basar, in this case, nevela. And a nevela is considered tmeah. You're not allowed to eat it, just like a sheretz is tameh. And yet the brisa derives in shrotzim from the extra hay that even the tzir, this light-colored juice that comes out of the shrotzim, um, if you put salt on them or if you put them over the fire, that's also prohibited. And by analogy, the same thing should apply, and the same status should apply to the tzir of a treifa, of a piece of meat that's treif, which means that the juice comes out of a treifa animal, as opposed to a kosher piece of meat, is now coming out of the treifa, and that juice, that tzir, is now being absorbed by the kosher piece of meat. So how, Rav Murray, could you allow this to go on and salt treifa meat and kosher meat simultaneously in the same vessel? Isn't it going to absorb the juice, which is tzir of a treifa? And now the kosher slaughtered piece of meat is going to be asur because it absorbs the tzir of a treifa. Now it's really interesting. On Kuf Yud Gimel, the Gemara is not going to even bother defending Rav Mori, but rather the Gemara wants to know, why did Rav have to stretch his arm out all the way to the laws of shrotzim and then make this analogy between the flesh of shrotzim and treifa meat? Lema le mida Shmuel. Why didn't Rav just quote the halach of Shmuel, which apparently was well known? The Amar Shmuel moliach harei kurosef v'kovash harei kumavushal. Right? What are you doing? You're salting treifa meat. Basically, by salting treifa meat together with kosher meat, you're cooking them together. So forget about seer and forget about going into this whole discussion about whether the juice itself is asur. Just talk about the fact that he's roasting kosher and non-kosher meat together. And now the Gemara is going to try to say, I'll just read it because we don't have time for it today, but I midishmuel, hava mina hanimili damam, aval tziram verotvam lo kamash malan. In other words, it seems that Rava wanted to tell us by and by another chidush. Because if you just would have said to Rav Mori, how could you salt kosher and non-kosher meat together in the same vessel, then the whole issue would be dam. But you might think that seer is not an issue at all. So Rava instead quoted the brisa of shrotzim to tell you that in the brisa of shrotzim we derive the conclusion from the extra hay that even the tzir is asur, and therefore Rava wants to tell you, by quoting this brisa of tzir in shrotzim, that the juice and the gravy of non-kosher creeping juice or meat, non-kosher meat, are prohibited. Now, I'm not sure because I didn't prepare tomorrow's daf yet. But if the Gemara swings by and then tries to defend Rav Mori, so we'll all be in suspense until tomorrow. So tomorrow is Yom Chamishi, same time tomorrow. Mitzvah. Have a great day. Thank you so much.